Dr. McMillian. Don't see him. Mr. Forbes.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Malayo. Don't see him. Dr. Barry.
No better place.
Thank you. And Sean Hammers is the one that's having technical difficulty. Rusty.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Antolini.
Present.
Dr. Milton.
Here.
Joe Hatton. I know Joe's trying to join. Hopefully he'll be here later. And Mr. Burnaby.
Here.
Thank you. And again, Dr. Amjad, we do have a quorum. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Jason. So we need a motion to review our previous meeting minutes, please.
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Okay. So those motion is approved from, that was from 12/17, right, Jason?
That's correct.
That was our last meeting. Okay, great. The second item on our
I'm sorry,
agenda.
I'm sorry. I meant to say that there is just one minor correction. My name is misspelled a couple of times from B-E-R-R-Y and then B-A-R-R-Y. That's all.
Okay, we'll fix that, Dr. Barry.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, thank you. And then our second item on the agenda is a legislative review. I think, Jason, are you going to take care of that?
Yes, I do want to take a step back real quick, Dr. Amjad, and ask if there's any discussion of the public comments we sent out to members.
Yeah, did everyone get that in their email?
On the public comments, the only discussion item I would have is just, you know, with respect to COVID, we've had to have all these new measures and it's important, obviously, that we all stay safe and we're doing these meetings virtually. But I am a little concerned about whether the public can truly participate in our discussions. In the beginning of these meetings, when the board was first formed, we would have rooms with almost standing room only public there speaking to us, giving us their input on the action items that were set for the day in the agenda. And I have a little concern about the way we're having to do these meetings, whether we're really getting the public dialogue firsthand. It seems like we're giving out an email link or something at the end of these meetings, which is allowing the public to send us comments afterwards. But sometimes that's not as effective as actually hearing them when we're debating what a recommendation from this board might be. So I would just ask that we look at that for the future. I mean, obviously, you know, hopefully we all continue to see the vaccine roll out and eventually we're safe to be somewhere where we can be together. But until that time, if we could look at some way to allow the public to participate through Zoom or somehow to give us meetings. I know we just had our subcommittee meeting and we did have one person speak to us directly. And I think that's helpful because I think at the end of the day, I mean, we need to hear from West Virginians all around the state. So, and other people that are industry folks that can kind of give us their thoughts on what actions we might be taking. So I would just ask that we consider that for future meetings of some forum to allow the public in real time to speak to us.
So, Mr. Forbes, I can speak to that a little bit. In the health and medical work group, we use the same process as your work group used. We had about a half a dozen public participants in that work group. And that Zoom access method did work. However, I'm just a little concerned because we usually have about 200 attendees at this main meeting. So I think that may become a little challenging to manage in that larger forum. But you know, we are open to what the board wishes to do. I would, however, point out that by code, the board is to accept written comment.
Well, and maybe as long as it's publicized, you know, in a way for them to get it to us in advance, or to allow, maybe you allow so many speakers and some time slots, you know, and they can sign up until the time slots are gone and do that in advance. But I'm just, I mean, you know, in a little bit spitballing in this, but I really want to make sure that the public is able to tell us what they think, and that we hear from folks that are in the industry that are starting to roll these things out. Because I know there's a number of things that come up in our agenda and recommendations we're asked to make. And I think that public comment is very helpful.
I would like to echo that sentiment also. For instance, this meeting, we've not yet been at it for 10 minutes, and I've already received a ton of text messages and messages over Facebook asking why there is no live stream up right now. So, people are definitely trying to pay attention, and I just think that it behooves this board to do all of our dealings, as transparently as possible. So I definitely echo Mr. Forbes' sentiment on that.
Yep. Rusty, I am getting the same messages. We do have a new process to make the live stream happen this time. It appears there may be some technical difficulty on that end. However, we should be able to post the recording of this meeting afterwards. We are doing the best we can to resolve those technical issues. Dr. Amjad, do you want to take an official position from the board about whether or not they want live participation from the public via Zoom? If we do go that route, I would recommend perhaps extending the amount of time we allow for this meeting. I don't think an hour would handle it.
No, I mean, what's the other live stream method? Facebook, isn't it?
Yeah, so what we've been doing for this larger forum is streaming the meeting through the DHHR Facebook page and then accepting written comments from the public afterwards, which are then forwarded to the members. What's being discussed is allowing the public to actually access the Zoom meeting and letting them speak to the board through that Zoom link. Again, I think that will be challenging. Not saying that it can't happen, but I definitely would say it'll take a longer amount of time than an hour to accommodate that.
Well, I mean, I would agree that if that's what the public is asking for, then we should do that and allow for a longer time, especially with the way things are progressing with medical cannabis, that we should allow that to happen, whether it's through Zoom or Facebook Live, whichever seems to be the more popular method. I mean, if more people access Facebook Live, then that should be the easier way rather than through Zoom, especially if Zoom crashes or something. So whatever the group thinks is more accommodating for people, we should go that route and allow more time. And if members have to jump off or do something, then pick a better time. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, we will definitely work on that. And at the end of the meeting, when we schedule the next one, we can just allow time for that process.
Does that seem okay with the group? And we'll pick a method, whichever seems more easy for questions for the public.
That makes complete sense to me. That just alleviates my concern. I just want to make sure the public is able to participate in this, and we're doing this as transparently and in the light as possible. So I think either format, whatever makes more sense, but as long as the public has the ability to sign up somehow to speak. So thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on to the legislative update. I'm going to try to speed through my part here so we have enough time to discuss the recommendations made by the group. So I have a list of bills here that are floating around the legislature. There's quite a variety that have been introduced at this point. Some for recreational or adult use cannabis, others to change the Medical Cannabis Act itself, specifically to allow edibles and smokable forms of medical cannabis. None of these bills have been moving through the legislature up to this point. However, SB 590 just today did get put on the Senate Health Committee schedule. So that one does seem to have life behind it. Still remains to be seen for the others. Any questions about the legislative update? All right, moving on. Omc Progress. We have made substantial progress since our last MCAB meeting. We have released our dispensary permits. We did issue 100 permits as the act allows throughout the state, and I'll show you a map in just a second to signify the distribution. Another major step is we began patient registration. As of today, I made this slide a few days ago. As of today, we have approximately 750 patient applications in. So there has been a significant response. Typically, we receive between 20 and 40 applications per day. I think the bottleneck on that process is the amount of doctor's appointments available throughout the state. Of course, the patients have to see a physician in order to be certified. So again, that the amount of physicians that we have currently seems to accommodate that 20 to 50 patients per day number. There are 52 physicians approved to certify patients throughout the state at this point. Recently, OMC added a second approved industry training provider to our website. So industry does have choice as to what training provider they use for their employees. OMC continues to field a very large number of patient contacts each day, both email and phone, and that can be into the hundreds each day. So again, significant response from the public. In order to help facilitate the patient registration process, we have posted a checklist and also a step-by-step patient user guide to our website to help them through that registration process. So I would encourage the public to seek out those documents. We continue to build out and utilize our licensing vendor and also our seed to sell vendor. On the licensing side, that system is complete and tested. The next phase of system utilization will be industry permit renewals. Believe it or not, time to renew those permits is rolling around already. That period is specific in the Act. Industry has to renew their permits between 6 months and 4 months before they expire. So we will be entering into that process soon. Seed to sell, again, we are continuing to implement. We have completed initial industry orientation to that system. Things seem to be going well. Next step for seed to sell will be actual industry training. We are waiting slightly before we implement that training. So it's a little bit closer to the operational status for industry. Any questions about that update? All right, thank you. Next up is a map. This signifies the dispensary distribution across the state. You'll notice that dispensaries are heavily concentrated in Kanawha County, Cabell County, and Monongalia County. That simply relates to the population centers across the state. However, I can tell you that industry does have an option to move. They have that option per code, and several are exploring the move into underserved areas, and OMC is helping to facilitate that process. I think it would be a good thing for the state overall if more underserved areas do have a dispensary located in their county. Any questions about that dispensary distribution? Thank you. All right, now on to the work group report outs. We'll start with Mr. Forbes.
Thanks, Jason. So the policy and program work group met. We had a lengthy conversation about Rusty Williams' proposal that was brought up at the last board meeting about whether we would make a recommendation to the legislature and the governor to allow for home and to have some limited number of plants that they could grow at home, which has been done in other states. We spent a significant amount of time talking about how that could potentially work. Ultimately, what we came down on from the work group was that since the industry really hasn't rolled out in West Virginia at this point, and we're likely talking about, the fall or even later at best, for the industry really to be in a position where patients are able to purchase product. I particularly had some concerns that we would be making a recommendation when we don't know what the effect is going to be on the market in terms of how that's going to affect people that are in the industry, and also whether or not it would affect the industry's ability to make this a viable product, which helps more patients statewide. And so we had some concerns that we really don't have a lot of data of how our rollout is going to be. We recognized, obviously, and Russ was adamant that, we've got cancer patients that are suffering right now in West Virginia, and we're one of the poorest states in the union, unfortunately. And we're in a position where a lot of these people are going to have difficulty affording the product when it does roll out. But really, a lot of this is just anecdotal right now. And so our ultimate recommendation was to table for now whether we make a recommendation, and that we instead ask that we get some commentary from folks in other states or industry folks that have operated in other states for either the full board or for our work group or both, to give us a better picture of what they see in these other states that have allowed limited home grow. And if we did that, we really would be better informed, and there really isn't much downside to it, as we would only be making a recommendation at this point. The legislative session this year is half over. And I think we felt that it was a little premature to go ahead and make a recommendation one way or the other, or ask the board to make a recommendation one way or the other for or against home grow, without having more information both from our specific industry when it rolls out and from the industry in other states and patients in other states as to what they've seen. And so what we're asking for as a work group is for the board as a whole to invite either legislators that are currently working on bills to do this, industry folks, or even regulatory folks from other that have seen this happen in other states, to speak to our board as a whole at the next board meeting, and to place this on the agenda there so we can really have a more informed discussion. And in the interim, our work group would meet again and invite speakers to come and explain to us both for or against home grow. One main concern that was brought up at the meeting was the potential to open this up to some kind of crime, and there wouldn't be regulation. And one thing I pointed out is, as working in the criminal law in this state for a very long time, I'm sitting in Charleston, West Virginia today, and I guarantee you, if somebody went over to the west side of Charleston right now with cash money, they could purchase marijuana on the street. And that's dangerous because it's not regulated and you don't know what's in what you're getting. But having said that, the idea that somehow a cancer patient is growing several of these plants at home and that's going to change whether people can buy this as a street drug seems to be a little bit of a dream, because this is out there now. So our position is that we should table this for now, put it on the full board's agenda, invite speakers to come talk to us about what they've seen in these other states. And those speakers can tell us a little bit about how the rollout's going here and what they anticipate. It's my understanding the industry is fairly neutral in this, but I'd like to hear from them directly. So that's our recommendation with respect to this issue on home grow.
Mr. Forbes, just to update you, I have secured a commitment from Senator Takubo to speak to you about that issue. And I'm working on a former regulator from one of the original medical cannabis states to speak to how home grow affected their program also. I don't want to say what state yet, because I haven't finalized the commitment.
My only comment on the crime issue is some data was recently released from the Cato Institute, which really shows that there's really no change in crime issues one way or the other with legalization from the medical standpoint. And I know we're not talking about recreational standpoint. It seems to be that really isn't a major issue and I don't know if that's specific to home grow or not, but in general terms.
Any other comment about home grow before we move on to Dr. Berry's recommendations? Okay. All right, Dr. Berry.
Thank you. So the health and medical work group met this week, and there were 3 of the members, myself and Mr. Bernabe and Dr. Malayo. And we also had a number of people who were able to join for public comment. Basically, the purpose was to determine whether to put forth out of our working group the 3 recommendations that I had submitted before the board at our last board meeting. And we took each of these items in seriatim. And the first item of the recommendation that we require cannabis be added to the West Virginia Board of Pharmacy Controlled Substance Automated Prescription Program. After debate or after discussion, all 3 members agreed that this would be a recommendation we would like to put forward to the board. Regarding the second recommendation, as far as requiring a cap on the THC limits, this recommendation failed. And so we did not put this forward to the board. And then the third recommendation, as far as addressing the combustible forms of cannabis, particularly smoking, this one was split. 2 of us agreed that this would be a good recommendation for the board to make, and 1 did not. So that's where we concluded the meeting.
Dr. Berry, if I could, I just want to remind the full board that smoking is not currently an acceptable use of medical cannabis. Your recommendation is simply to continue that stance.
To continue that, and to essentially from the board's recommendation that this would be the messaging that we want to make the public aware that smoking would not be considered a safe route for any medication.
Hey, Jason, I just want to chime in. I had a computer problem earlier. I don't know where you guys lost me or where I fell off, but I apologize.
I'm sorry, Mr. Forbes. I thought that you were done. I didn't know that you had dropped off.
Yeah.
Did you have any further comment on your work group?
No. I just wanted, I wasn't sure where I froze up and dropped off, but I did just want to let everybody know I was back. So I apologize.
Thank you. Dr. Berry, I'm going to go back to your first CSAP recommendation. Dr. Amjad, I recommend that you open discussion of that.
Do we have any comments on the first recommendation by Dr. Berry, adding it to the controlled substance program for medical cannabis?
I just have a question. You know, I spoke since after the work group discussion, I've spoken with a couple different people who are, you know, pharmacists, and their concern is that since cannabis is still a Schedule I substance, both federally and here on the state level, that, you know, by adding cannabis to the controlled substance automated program, that this could potentially run afoul with, you know, DEA and with their, you know, their DEA licensing. So I'm wondering if that is a concern that you guys have thought of, or, you know, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so that wasn't addressed. You know, right now, there are other non-scheduled medications such as Narcan, naloxone that are on the reports. And so I think this could be done in a way that is similar, is in keeping with that, but I can't speak to the DEA issue.
If I could echo or chime in on what Rusty just mentioned, that was the one concern, one of the concerns I saw when I read the recommendation from the legal perspective, which is sort of my role as to why I was appointed onto the board. We were very cautious in the beginning of all of this to not do anything that ran afoul of the DEA rules or put doctors or pharmacists in a position where they could be construed to be prescribing in any way this as a quote unquote medication. And what worries me from the language of this and by doing this is that I'm not sure we know the answers to what that means to these to pharmacists and physicians if this gets added into this. I also wonder whether it creates any potential liability for any pharmacists or physicians that would put this through as at that point, basically saying it's a medication. I mean, and I'm not a doctor, but legally, it seems to me if you're certifying a patient could benefit from medical cannabis, that's one thing. But if you're actually telling them to go take a medication or prescribing it, you come much closer to that DEA level, even if it's not a normally prescribed medication. And I'd be really cautious that we're getting into that territory with this, and would be interested in hearing whether, DHHR's councils looked at this, or whether that's something we should have done, is have, a legal opinion done on this to tell us if it's a problem. I also wonder practically how it would work, because I know that we initially the law had that a pharmacist or a doctor had to be on site at the dispensaries. And we had actually recommended in our initial report removing that because of the added expense to the patients to have to pay to have a pharmacist, 7 days a week at one of these dispensaries. I'm just wondering how practically this would work too, and whether that was considered in putting that out.
Well, I have another question, like regarding, because it is medication and you're talking about prescription, where does FDA stand here? Because FDA is the body that approve all the medications.
Yeah, and federally, this is still illegal. So I mean, the FDA isn't going to put this out as a medication at this point. And then all of a sudden, again, you get back to whether, as a physician, are you now essentially prescribing an illegal medication? If I was advising a doctor, I'd be very concerned as an attorney to advise them to do this.
As a physician, Mr. Forbes, I agree with you. I've mentioned this before. The elephant in the room remains Schedule 1. And this has to be a recommendation and not a prescription. Recommendation only. By going to the CSAP, then that's going to blur that line. Personally, the CSAP's a bit burdensome anyway. I understand its goal. But the idea that this must be only a recommendation and not a prescription. The history shows that the DEA is not that interested in pursuing these issues of prescriptions of a Schedule I drug, particularly with cannabis, but that could change at any minute. So we have to maintain this as a recommendation only and not a prescription. And I'm a little worried about CSAP, and that confuses it.
Yeah, that was my concern too, like using the word prescription.
So I don't see why the physician would be even connected with, a physician's name would even be connected with the item that would appear on the report. So it would be just report for the patient and what has been dispensed. So the physicians wouldn't even have to be on there.
That's a great point. I guess we'd have to be sure that CSAP would agree with that and that it isn't a recommending physician's name that's associated with the compound. And again, maybe that's a legal issue.
Is this
That's
something
fine.
that we could address sort of the way that we're doing the home grow potential home grow recommendation? Is this something that maybe we should try to get a representative from, CSAP? Maybe we could, try to get some folks who are better educated on this issue to maybe come into another work group discussion or present for the full board, so we have some more information before we decide to make a recommendation.
I support that. I think that's a good idea. If we could get then, and from what Mr. Forbes said earlier, legal counsel from DHHR and also maybe Mike Goff from the Board of Pharmacy to come and speak about how this could be operationalized and the legalities of it.
We can certainly get the Board of Pharmacy involved, and as far as legal opinion goes, whether that comes from DHHR's counsel or perhaps an AG opinion, but we can certainly seek that out.
This is JJ. So, I'm on the board of pharmacy. I'm also a retail pharmacist. And I also have an Ohio retail pharmacy as well, where their controlled substance monitoring program does require you to report medicinal marijuana. And I've seen those reports. So when I fill a controlled prescription, especially for a patient that's naive to the store, I'm required to run that report. And when you run that report, it does show up there if they're on that treatment. Now, as a pharmacist who has a corresponding responsibility to all the controlled substances that are prescribed for a patient, I don't see how it could not be on there. Now, if you're worried about legal stuff, that's fine. But if you're talking about treating a patient medically, you can't limit what you know about the patient's medical therapies. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And if you're doing it to guard against somebody getting in trouble, I think that just compounds the issue. That doesn't absolve anybody from any liability. And again, I'm a practicing pharmacist, and if I have a patient who's using a controlled substance or any substance, whether it's a recommendation, a medicine, a homegrown remedy, I have a responsibility to know all that to properly to properly care for them. So I don't know how you could not have it on there. But then again, I'm a practicing pharmacist, and that's from my viewpoint.
That was my viewpoint too, as a practicing physician.
But I don't think anybody's here is suggesting that this serves as a medical reconciliation database. I think that all those points, but you must know all medicines and alternative medicines whenever you're treating a patient. I think this is looking at a substance abuse or controlled substance automatic prescription program versus a regulatory issue and getting into prescription versus recommendation. I'm just a little concerned, and I still think that legal counsel may help us on that.
I agree with that. I think from a legal standpoint, there's a lot of unknowns, and those are frightening to lawyers. But my suggestion would be that we get more information, much like the recommendation we made with home grow, and get some more information on this and put it on the next, put it up on one of the future agendas, and get a legal opinion either from the Attorney General's office or DHHR's legal counsel. And we could invite, as Dr. Berry mentioned, folks that are familiar with this to come speak to us about it, so we could make an informed decision before we recommend something to the legislature that could be problematic for our state's doctors and pharmacists.
Then, Jason, my suggestion will be we can see how Ohio handles it. We can see what our legal team thinks of it, and we can bring that work group back together and get some ideas for some things that make everyone comfortable, whether it's physicians, pharmacists, lawyers, and see how everyone best handles it for the safety of everybody, to make it the best practices. So,
Dr. Amjad, since this did pass the work group to be sent to the larger board for consideration, I'd recommend that you ask for a motion to send it back to the work group and take a vote.
do we have a motion to send it back to the work group for all those concerns then? Because it
I'll
doesn't
make
seem
that
like
motion.
it. Right, is there a second?
Second.
Right. And if we can get all those groups together to come up with a consensus, I think that can answer all those concerns that everyone has.
Okay. Moving on to the next recommendation.
Any comments on the second one?
Yeah, I've got a few comments. I'm very much against this particular recommendation as a patient, with personal experience with cannabis and somebody who has spoken with patients all across the country. I just think this is going to be another barrier as far as patient access. Allowing cannabis to be used in its natural form, it's by far the cheapest method. When you go to these dispensaries and you're looking at processed products, sometimes, you know, they can be really expensive. And, you know, we're one of the most economically depressed states in the country. And I just think that, again, this is just putting up an unnecessary barrier for patients getting access to their medicine. There are 36 states, you know, currently allowing medical cannabis, and only 3 of those states prohibit flower: Louisiana, Minnesota, and Virginia. I suspect Virginia, that's going to change pretty soon. They just voted to legalize completely for everyone 21 and older, including a 4-plant home grow provision. So they're going to let people and patients grow their own in Virginia. So I don't think that that prohibition is going to stand for long. And then there's the issue of the efficacy of the medicine. When you use the whole plant in its natural form, you're getting what is referred to as the entourage effect. You know, all of the cannabinoids are working together synergistically to produce the medicinal effect. Whereas when you're using concentrates and products, they're typically, you know, concentrated THC, that's all you're getting. So you're not getting the rest of the cannabinoids. And one thing that I will say, as a patient who had to use cannabis, when I went through aggressive chemotherapy treatments and I was using cannabis to get through those side effects, you know, there was no legal access to cannabis. I had to use black market cannabis, whatever I was able to find. And, you know, within 30 seconds of one hit of black market cannabis, and I did use a vaporizer, you know, so I wasn't smoking, it wasn't, you know, I wasn't combusting the cannabis, it was being vaporized. Within 30 seconds of one hit of black market cannabis, the nausea and the vertigo that came from those chemotherapy treatments was completely taken away. I just think that as far as regulation of dose, you know, if you give someone, especially someone who has not experienced with cannabis, a concentrated form, you know, whether that be in a pill or a tincture, if they take that and it's too much, you know, it is what it is. It's already in your system. Whereas if you can, you know, inhale it or vaporize it and inhale it, you know, within 30 seconds to a minute whether that was enough or if you need more. And it really allows the patient to tailor their dose to, you know, to their pain levels or their nausea levels or whatever the case may be. And, you know, just again, from an efficacy standpoint, allowing whole plant flower is, to me, the safest route to go. And again, I can't stress enough that when this board was created, you know, when the Medical Cannabis Act was passed, this board, our initial 3 charges were to look at vertical integration, to look at whether or not to allow flower as an acceptable method of delivery, and then to look at the list of conditions, right? We weren't charged to make those recommendations until 2019. We ended up making those recommendations a year early. So this body has already recommended to the legislature, you know, in 2018 that flower be added as an acceptable method of delivery. And I just think that moving backwards is the wrong way to go.
So if I could just pause here real quick, Dr. Berry, I think we need some clarification. Are you recommending to ban flower because it's combustible? Or are you recommending to ban the combustion of flower? I think that's 2 different things.
Yeah, the combustion of flower.
Okay. Is everyone clear on that clarification?
Hey, Jason, I mean, didn't we, when we made the recommendation for dry leaf and then the legislature ultimately adopted that, didn't we take a position saying that we were not supporting smoking at that time? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is
Yes.
Haven't we, if that's the recommendation that we recommend to the legislature that you not be allowed to smoke it or, you know, that it not be burned, haven't we essentially said that previously? I guess that's the only thing that I'm a little confused about is whether we
Yes,
need
sir.
the-
That is correct. The board did recommend flower be available. That has been implemented by the legislature. And in that recommendation, they were specific that it be utilized by vaporization or nebulization only, not combustion. I think, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Berry, he can chime in, but I think what Dr. Berry is trying to do is simply reiterate that the board does not agree with the combustion of these products. And Dr. Berry, if you want to clarify, feel free.
No, yeah, that's exactly it. And I think it's a strong public health message that we're sending. We've spent decades trying to help people understand the dangers of tobacco smoke. And I think this would be a good message to send from a public health message that, listen, we, from the medical community, that we cannot ever recommend as a safe route of delivery, smoking anything. And that would be the purpose.
Yeah. So again, this recommendation would not affect the availability of flower to patients.
Right, but what it will do is further stigmatize language surrounding this medicine. You know, there's already a prohibition in statute saying, you know, prohibiting smoking. When we made the recommendations, we made the recommendations to allow the vaporization and not smoking. This is already in statute, and we've already made this point. I just think it's redundant to make it again.
Sure, and that's completely up to the group. I just wanted to clarify what was being recommended.
Can I ask, I mean, our charge is to make recommendations to the legislature to implement changes to the medical cannabis law, right?
Yes.
And one concern I've got is, I mean, are we just, I don't want the legislature to read our if we send a specific recommendation back up on something they already listened to us on and they already did, are we just going to start confusing them as to what it is that we're asking them to do? I mean, they've already done this, and I voted for it before. I mean, that we make clear that we are not supporting smoking. Nobody thinks that smoking things is something that's good for, you know, people in West Virginia to do. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate on that. What I'm worried about is that if we start making recommendations we've already made before, are we just watering down when we make a real recommendation? And are we just going to confuse the legislature sending something up that they already listened to us on and did? I mean, that's the one concern. I mean, Dr. Bear, do you follow what I'm saying there? I mean, I guess I'm just asking, are you asking for something new? Or, I mean, if, you know, because I'm not quite sure our charge is to just, you know, put out a public health message. I think DHHR could do that. They could put out a press release that we discussed again, how we've previously recommended that this not be smoked or something along those lines. But I'm not sure that our charge here is to put out a public health statement.
I hear you.
I just, Joe Deegan, I wonder whether or not it is clear when the product gets to people that the message is that it is not to be smoked. We may have made that recommendation before. Maybe the concern that Dr. Berry has is that there needs to be, you know, like on a pack of cigarettes, you know, the Surgeon General does not recommend, some form of identifying that this product, you know, we can't literally stop people from smoking it, but I think what Dr. Berry is trying to get across here is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Berry, is that we send a strong message of the health hazards of smoking it.
Correct.
What if we asked as a group for the Office of Medical Cannabis to release our prior recommendations again with that the board has again indicated and discussed dry leaf, and that the board again would not recommend that the dry leaf be smoked or something along those lines, but not something that actually is a call to action by the legislature.
Again,
I'm going to add something to that. And I think language does matter. And I think what you said, Jesse, is important about changing things. I think we can work with language, whether or not smoking, of course, is not recommended in any healthcare field, but using language is important. You can change words to excess smoking, but what Rusty said is important. Obviously, smoking medical cannabis is how cannabis is used. So I think language can be changed in this, excess smoking and so on. But I mean, I think words or changes to the language can be something that can be used if that's what you guys are referring to. But I think what you guys are saying is important in that. But, obviously medical cannabis is mostly is smoked. I mean, that is what it is used for. I mean, you can, use edibles, you can use other forms, which we are aware of, but to change the language there takes away from the fact of what, Rusty was stating to the fact earlier. So, but of course, what Dr. Berry, we do not condone smoking in any form. For us to go out and say that would be also against medical practice and healthcare things. So, but I think, excess smoking, X amount of smoking, putting warning labels, things like that would obviously come out from the medical cannabis office. I think most people are aware of that.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit further. OMC does have control over other products that are sold in dispensaries. As the law stands right now, because of the prohibition of smoking, we would not allow the sale of any sort of product that facilitates that use. So that's one aspect. It sounds like the board is moving more towards a warning, and we would certainly be open to distributing a warning or a patient advisory type document to patients when they purchase flower, if that's something the board thinks would be effective.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was just about to ask. With I know the DHHR does have rulemaking authority with as far as some of this stuff goes. So would it not be better to maybe come up with some language that sort of like what's on the side of a pack of cigarettes? When you buy your cannabis at the dispensary, just somehow create a protocol where there's language on the product, a sticker or whatever on the product when you buy it that says, that we stand against smoking or what, some prohibition of smoking. I just don't think making this recommendation to the legislature is the right way to go. Again, it's already in statute. We already, stood against smoking when we made the recommendations in 2018. So I think that maybe there's a better way to do it. I have no problem with, informing folks when they purchase their cannabis at the dispensary, that the board has, we stand behind the practice of, or we stand behind not smoking or whatever, however you want to word it. But I don't think that recommending or making another recommendation to the legislature is necessarily helpful. Again, I think it further stigmatizes the language surrounding, medical cannabis as a product and as a concept. And I just, with the outlook and the way things are going with the legislature, I just think that could be taken and run with in all sorts of different directions.
Could we ask the office to put together maybe a potential patient advisory or warning and present that to us at the next meeting? And then we could look at whether that's something that might satisfy what you're trying to do here, Dr. Berry.
That's reasonable.
And I would recommend that we include what the safe ways are of using the product. Because people are going to look at it. Some people may say, the only thing I know about this is smoking it. They may not even realize what other means are of safely using the product. And I just think that needs to be included in any kind of advisory.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple different options for that. By law, there already has to be a safety insert with these products. We could go that route, or has been suggested, we could develop a warning label language. Again, there are already a couple different warnings that by law have to be on the packaging, and I don't even know that we'd have to go the rule route to accomplish that. I think we could require it by policy. But if that's what the board wants to do, I would recommend sending this back also to the work group for input in the development of that language. Certainly there are multiple positions on that work group, and I think that input would be very valuable.
I'd make that motion if it's the appropriate time.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Do you want to take a vote on that, Dr. Amjad?
We're going to take a vote to have this moved to back to the committee then?
Everybody that's a yay, just verbally.
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah.
Any nays? Okay. So it looks like both those are going back to the work group. Dr. Amjad, it looks like next up is our scheduling, but before we do that, it looks like Mr. Hammers was able to join us. He is a new member. I'd like to give him just a second if he would like to introduce himself to the board.
Thank you, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sean Hammers. I'm a prosecutor in Capital County. Happy to attend the meeting this afternoon.
Thank you. We always like to give our new members a second to introduce themselves. Okay. So action items. I have OMC will facilitate Zoom access for public comment to the next meeting. Also, the CSAP recommendation will go back to the Health and Medical Work Group for further consideration. And the smoking ban recommendation will also go back to the Health and Medical Work Group for further consideration and evaluation. Any other action items from the board?
Do we need I don't know if we need a vote on it or not, but I think our work group had suggested that home grow actually be, we get information presented both to our work group and at the full agenda, full board meeting on the next agenda.
Yes, sir. I didn't recommend a vote on that because you didn't actually send it for consideration of the larger group. But if you disagree, we could definitely take a vote.
No, I don't disagree with the vote issue at all. I just want to make sure if we're going over agenda items that we will look at home grow as well in our next work group meeting, and we'll likely ask that it be some information on it be presented at the next full board meeting.
Yep, absolutely. Any other action items?
I'm not sure that how to really go about it, but I would like to share some of the feedback that I've been getting from patients, who have gone to see or reached out to some of the physicians that are on the the approved physicians list. Quite a few patients have reached out to doctors that have told them they're either not seeing new patients. There have been more than a few doctors that have said that, the entities that they currently work for have basically told them that although they're certified, they're not permitted to participate in this program. So, I'm worried about patient access from that standpoint. Maybe it's something worth looking at, down the line, making a recommendation that instead of having this really restrictive list of qualifying conditions, that maybe we open it up to where any physician or practitioner in West Virginia, if they feel their patient could benefit from medical cannabis, that would give them the right to make that recommendation. I just think that there's a lot of patients who not only can use this medication, but who have been using it illegally for quite a while. Under the current circumstances, are not going to be able to access it legally, and I think that's going to present a problem. So I'm not sure how to go about kicking that discussion off, but I do think it's definitely worth discussing. To me, the whole purpose of this board is to figure out how to facilitate better patient access, and I do think that that's going to pose a real problem.
So Rusty, if I could, before that discussion starts, I would like to address the physician issue. What you stated definitely was a problem when we first got started. We recognized that, as you stated, patients were seeking out physicians and were then told they weren't accepting new patients. We generated that list from physicians that applied to be certified and also took the training. So after we recognized that problem, we sent out a survey to those physicians and asked them whether or not they wanted to fully participate in the program, accept new patients, whether or not they only wanted to see their existing patients, or whether or not they wanted to remain certified but not be on the public list. So while it's not perfect, I think we have addressed some of those issues with physician access, but we'll continue to work on that and streamline that process for the patients.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any discussion of Rusty's larger recommendation?
I think what you are doing, you continue to do that.
Rusty, did you want to restate your recommendation to expand eligibility, just so
Yeah.
the group's clear?
Yeah, I think that, of course, we would still require practitioners and physicians to register and go through the continuing education courses and all that. But I do think that having that list of conditions, it's very strict. We have patients dealing with things like gastroparesis, endometriosis, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, palindromic rheumatism. There's a laundry list of conditions that patients in other states are able to they're able to utilize the medical cannabis industry there and get that kind of therapy. But here in West Virginia, they're just simply not. And I do think it merits the discussion to potentially making the recommendation to open up the recommendation process so that practitioners' hands aren't tied, basically. So you don't have to just certify this list of 16 conditions or whatever. If you're a practitioner or a physician in West Virginia and you believe one of your patients could benefit from medical cannabis, I think you should have the right to make that recommendation.
So I think what you're wanting to do is basically remove the specific list of serious medical conditions and recommend that if a physician feels their patient would benefit from medical cannabis, that they be able to certify that patient.
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes, sir.
Any discussion of that?
Should we put that to one of the work groups to kind of work through and get some more input for?
Yep, absolutely. Any preference on what work group that goes to from the board members?
I don't have a specific preference as far as which work group it goes to, but I do think that whatever work group it goes to, we need to have a robust discussion with patients. We need to include people who maybe are using legally in other states, and I can certainly make some of those connections. I'm pretty well connected with patients from at least all of our surrounding states. But I do think patients need to be part of that discussion so you can hear exactly, what some of these people are going through and how exactly they are benefiting from this medicine.
I'm just going to make a suggestion, perhaps, since it is Rusty's recommendation, maybe we send it back to policy and procedure, the work group that Rusty's on, just for a start, and go from there, if the board is open to that.
Makes sense to me.
Can we get a motion to send that recommendation to the policy and procedure work group?
So moved, Milton.
How about a second?
Second.
All right. Everyone that's yay, just verbalize that.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yay.
Any nays? Any nays? Okay, so we'll send that to the work group also. Another action item, we have received a couple form submissions for new medical cannabis conditions. I can't say that they were complete submissions, but I'm also going to forward those to the health and medical work group for consideration and possible forwarding to the larger board. Okay. Any other action items? All right. Next thing we have on our list is to set the date for the next meeting. I have that being, let's see, June 17th, if we stick with our third Thursday format. However, going back to the previous discussion, we are going to need more than just an hour with the addition of live public comment. Would the group be open to noon to 2 p.m. or would that be difficult for everyone?
That works for me.
My perspective, the 17th might be problematic with a long meeting. The following Thursday, the 24th is fine, but I have an
Okay.
issue on this.
The 24th, noon to 2. Any further comment on that?
It would,
Especially from the physicians.
yeah, it would be difficult for me. I could possibly do noon to 1:30, but then I have a standing clinic that's at 1:30.
Noon to 1:30.
I would agree with that compromise, noon to 1:30.
All right. If no further comment, we'll go with June 24th, noon to 1:30.
That'll work.
Okay. Are there any other topics that the group wants to add to that upcoming meeting? I think we'll have a pretty full schedule as it is. Okay. Dr. Amjad, I'll send it back to you to close out the meeting.
Okay, if no one has anything else, then we can adjourn. We just need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So
moved.
Second.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.